Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rebecca Thistlethwaite. I'm the Program Manager of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. We are a national community of practice, people and organizations helping small meat processors thrive and growing our shared wealth of information and innovation. We host bi-monthly webinars on different topics that our members ask us to share more information on. And this particular topic is one that I continue to get phone calls and emails about pretty much all year long. Different producers or groups of meat producers considering purchasing an existing plant or building a new plant from scratch or renovating some other sort of facility like a food processing facility to turn it into a meat processing plant. And I realized that we didn't have this on our website, nor any webinars about this topic, about how just the decision-making process that goes into weighing the pros and cons of building from scratch or utilizing an existing space. So today we're going to have, we're supposed to have 3 meat processors, although I think one of them has not joined us yet. But we're going to have a few meat processors talk about how they made those decisions, the pros and cons of the way they went about deciding how to, structure their business and either build a new building or renovate one. And then we're going to get into some of the financial considerations, rounding it out with William Kitsch of Ephrata National Bank, who's an agricultural lender. So our first panelist is Jessica Smith of This Old Farm Meat Processing Facility in Indiana. Then we may have, I'm not sure if he is going to join us or not, but hopefully Tracy Smachez of Heritage Meats in Washington State. Then we're going to have Matthew Campbell of West Texas Meats in Texas, obviously, and then Bill Kitsch of Ephrata National Bank. So without further ado, we're going to launch right into Jessica Smith, who's going to talk for about 10 minutes about This Old Farm. Take it away, Jessica.
Here. Am I?
Unmute, Jessica. Perfect.
You're good to go.
Now we're good? Okay. Sound okay? Very good. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate that, and cut in at any point in time if I need to speak louder. So first introduction I wanted to change. My name is now Jessica Rusa, recently married, and that is possibly important. So just wanted to get that out there. Really here just to give a case study, my own case study, and hopefully answer some questions. My goal is always to lower the learning curve because there's a large learning curve. So feel free to reach out to me at any point in time. That is my overall goal. Really, I have more questions than I have answers for anybody. So I love the opportunity to network and what this group does for us there. I think it's important before we get too far to look at what motivates us to either renovate or build and just take 1 second to think about that. So my current mission today is different than my original mission when I first got started. So my current mission today, personal mission, is to encourage balance in life, myself, those around me, in the world as a whole, though I'm not all that hippie, but a little hippie, as I'm able. And I think that is important because agriculture is at the core of keeping a balanced environment. Livestock is a needed part of that balance, and therefore meat processing is important. I think we all think meat processing is important if we're here, but I wanted to at least think about why we're thinking about building or renovating a meat plant. And I say this because I'm a former vegetarian, a woman, a mother of 5, first-generation farmer. And so typically I sit in any room that's talking about meat production as the true minority in the room. And therefore, why did I get into what I'm doing today? How did I get here? So my original mission, separate from my mission today, which has changed, my original mission in building or renovating a meat plant was to get my own product out to market. So I had a first generation farm, wanted to get my product out to market, and I started researching meat processing, found that there's an issue in the industry, and I was young and naive and thought, boy, I can tackle some of this and jump in myself. And that's what I did. Started that process with a feasibility study. Thought I was real smart then, that I needed to research this, right? So did a feasibility study about on-farm processing. So I looked at taking our farm operation and building on the farm from the ground up, no wastewater management, no infrastructure whatsoever. It looked at that through a feasibility study. At that time, through that feasibility study, I actually found a facility for sale 7 miles away from the farm. And it was very clear at that point in time, because that facility was available, it wasn't marked for sale, but upon contacting the owners, it was for sale. And so at that point in time, through that feasibility study, it did make more sense to purchase and look at renovating a facility. So 7 miles, it was only $150,000. Look at that number. And it had existing customers. It seemed to make sense. So you jump in, or I jumped in, we purchased a meat processing facility 7 miles away. We're getting service processing going, and we're now processing our farm product, getting it out to market, and that facility burned down just a year later. So the statistic is pretty well known in amongst existing infrastructure out there, and we were one of those statistics. So lost that facility just a year later. Definitely underinsured. So whether you build or renovate, if you really want to be in business, you need to look at your insurance policies. Definitely underinsured, but we were able to rebuild that facility on the existing footprint. Again, total loss from fire, but rebuilt on the existing footprint, because under the ground, or at the ground and under the ground, there's still a lot of infrastructure, even without anything on top. $540,000 went into the rebuild. I really believe that was a miracle that we got that facility rebuilt for $540,000 in 6 months on the existing property. Since then, we've added on 3 different times, and the last year purchased surrounding acreage, looking to the next stage of growth from there. So looked at both renovation, building without any previous infrastructure, and then also building on existing infrastructure as far as foundation and under wastewater management, basically. Lessons learned, that's what we're here to talk about. Life is hard, farmers are grumpy, and business grows you up a lot. So you can handle that however you want to handle that. It can make you calloused too, so you need to be careful. That's not really what we're talking about, but that's kind of a nutshell, right? Other lessons learned about the actual business and what we would have done differently, or what I would have done differently, is find that mission earlier. I told you I changed my mission. I knew what I wanted to accomplish, but I really didn't know what I wanted to accomplish. And sometimes we jump into things without really thinking about what we're trying to get accomplished from that. So that original vision of building on farm to process just our own definitely didn't hold enough merit when looked at. The service processing is working, and I find good value in that, and the ability to give back to the farming community. So balance is key, and understanding your own limits and the limits of those around you. Also went into business thinking that all employees were dedicated to work as long as hours as I wanted to work, and all of the employee myths that we might have out there. So really taking time to understand the industry and do things like this, as well as find mentors, I think is crucial. Some of the pros and cons that I kind of jotted down about actually renovating versus building. That existing customer base was incredibly helpful. I've worked to help write business plans for others that are starting with just their product, or starting without an existing customer base, and it's certainly harder to get that business to cash flow without a larger investment pool ahead of time. So having an existing customer base, even though it was small, and even though we've grown it 5 times since then, was important. So income was coming in almost immediately when we purchased a facility. The other thing that, systems and business systems, by purchasing an existing facility that had previous management in place, there were business systems that were in place and vendor relationships that went with the building, and greatly underestimated how important those are in the long run. Some of the cons of taking an existing facility, I said there are systems in place, but they were all antiquated. They were all aged, definitely difficult to work with. We couldn't have taken that facility under federal inspection. That the number of maintenance needs, even though I thought that I had a good long list and I thought I understood what federal inspectors needed, I was grossly wrong, if you will. I could not have taken that facility immediately under federal inspection or anytime soon. Energy efficiencies in that old facility were just terrible. I remember that first year we were taking a foot of ice and using a fork to break up, a pitchfork to break up a foot of ice around all freezers in that existing facility. So that was obviously a great loss of energy there. And if you can imagine, because there's that great loss of energy and that much ice, human comfort was very low. And I've come to understand that your employees work best when they're comfortable, and that facility wasn't necessarily comfortable. Some of the cons of building: why did I not choose to build on farm or build from the beginning? Whether I was smart or not, I didn't have the guts to walk into a bank and say, here I am, I want $1.5 million to build a facility from the ground up. I have no previous meat cutting experience, no previous experience in the meat industry other than being a first generation farmer, but I know this is going to work. I didn't have that ability to tell that story, and I had to get some experience someplace. And I could get some experience that way. So that's one of the reasons I was interested in hearing the banker speak first. Sorry, I'm trying to look for a key real quick here. Sorry about the interruption. I think we got it. Thanks for your patience there. One of the issues with financing, and what we're going to get as far as a con there, getting new financing on an existing or on a no facility, building from the ground up, the appraisals on these facilities don't oftentimes work out, whether it be new or existing. And one of the driving home factors for me there, when I talked to the appraiser last year with these rural facilities, he said he appraises them like he appraises a pole barn. So we have all this high dollar, high cost infrastructure in this building. And when he comes out to appraise it for financing, he's appraising it as if it was going to park tractors. And that really brought to home why we have a hard time with financing in the industry. And obviously, if you're going to build from the ground up, that's going to be even more difficult there. And then building is stressful. Going back to that remarriage thing, right? So building is stressful. Building is even more stressful when you have a budget and timeline that you have to stick by. And so you have to consider that as well. The pros of building from the ground up, the facility that we have now is fantastic as far as a small meat processing facility in rural America, rural Indiana. It's beautiful. It's taken several different remodels to get it to where it is today, but it's comfortable. It has the comfort factor built in. Our employees like to come to work because it looks nice, right? You have to have pride in what you do. And if we were to build from the ground up, you can really think about your scalability and where you want that business to be in the end. What level of meat processing are you doing? Are you doing just poultry? Are you doing just pork? Are you doing just beef? The existing facility that we purchased jumped us into beef processing. Hindsight 2020, I'm glad it did, but that wasn't originally part of the plan. But in order to make the most of the cooler space that we had, we went into beef processing, and it does work for us now. The one thing that I wanted to mention, as far as if I were to go back in time and start over in that planning or the feasibility stage, if I were to think about going to ask for that $1.5 million to build a new facility, what that would force you to do is to look for a mentor, to look for a partner. And that's something that I didn't do early on, to look for somebody that had the experience without the 9 years of experience through the lesson of hard knocks along the way of trial and error. But to get that experience to begin with and be a partner in that business, I think has great merit. So that might be one benefit of building from the ground up. Do I still have a few minutes to talk about financial considerations here? Yes, okay. So financial considerations, we have done well by slowly scaling this business. It's allowed us to take on debt as we were able to take on debt. Definitely debt averse in the beginning. It's scary to have debt. It's scary to put the farm up for collateral. But in the end, right now, where we are servicing our debt pattern well. And we've been able to, people come into our facility today and they say, wow, it's changed so much. It looks great. How'd you do that? And so, well, the bank has more confidence in us today than they had on that day one. Now they're willing to lend a little more and get us to a facility that looks a little nicer and presents better in the front. As far as what financing we were able to obtain in the beginning, the farm was leveraged, so just 88 acres, but it allowed us enough capital to get into this business as far as processing. But that took taking all retirement savings, it took all my kids' college funds. Yes, those things cause stress when you take out everything that you own to put into something else. Obviously, bank financing in different ways, real estate loans, facility loans for building facilities, and then operating loans. And I underestimated the need for operating loans early on. And that was a hard couple winters because it is a seasonal business. And I sit much more comfortable now with operating loans in place, knowing that we will have some seasonality, but we'll be okay. And then grant funding, we were well grant funded, and owe a lot of thanks to the folks that supported us there. So was it worth it? Yeah, I have 9 years in now. My kids are all working in the business, which is a true blessing. My husband's here as well. Our facilities are comfortable, and every day I get to wake up and work a mission, which is about balance and helping the American farmer. So if you really truly have that at the pit of your stomach as something that you need to do, I certainly understand it. And there is a way to get there. My current question, of course, today is now, how do I get from here to the next place, the next stage of growth, and stay cost competitive in this market, which is tough.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Our next speaker he needs to join as a panelist, and he has not yet, but he may come on a little bit later, so we may change the order. Anyway, why don't we switch to Matt Campbell of West Texas Meats, and he'll talk about building his small plant from the ground up. Take it away, Matt, after you shut the door.
Good morning. Yeah, I'm Matt Campbell, and I did build a brand new slaughter plant in 2015. And so I'm just going to run through the agenda kind of as Rebecca sent it to me. She asked me to introduce my plant. We're about a 3,000 square foot multi-species slaughter plant. Our capacity is somewhere around 20 beef equivalent a week, so we're pretty small. The building is a metal shell with a steel frame, and then inside the metal shell, we used insulated metal panels for the processing room, both coolers and the freezer. So it's a meat market inside a metal shell, basically. We have about a 200 square foot inedible cooler attached on the back, and then a covered holding pen on one side. And roughly, we spent about $180 a square foot building this facility, and that includes the cold panels, the doors, the cold doors, the refrigeration equipment, and the meat rail system. just the building by itself was a lot cheaper than that, but when you added in everything we needed, it ran it up to about 180 a square foot. And then on top of that, I spent about $250,000 buying equipment. Some of it used, some of it new. We have a small retail shop in the front of the business, and we do a little bit of wholesale business, but primarily we're a slaughter plant. So the next bullet was the process of building from scratch. I did a lot of research. I spent about 4 years. I retired from the oil field, and in my last few years that I worked in the oil field, I did a lot more work for this business than I did for them. I spent a lot of time researching, talking to people, reading stuff on NMPAN's website, and I got in touch with a really good consultant. I would recommend anybody doing this from scratch. If you've never done it before and you're not real sure about what you're doing, find a good consultant. We were lucky enough to get in touch with Mr. Darrell Hudson out of Montgomery, Texas, and he walked me through the whole process. If I hadn't had Darrell helping me out, I probably wouldn't have been able to do this. Another thing that I would mention is, as you're building, like Jessica mentioned, think about where you want to go. Build with growth in mind. Things like stubbing out plumbing out the side of the building, so if you ever add it onto the building, you can tie into your drain system. When you bring in your electricity, make sure you bring in enough power that if you add on another wing to the building, you've got enough power pulled in that all you got to do is go put in a breaker and you're good to go. Some lessons learned, as Jessica already pointed out, you better know why you want to do this. And if you're not sure, you might not want to do it. For me, it was kind of a lifelong dream. I grew up working in a little business like this, spent 30 years working in the oil field. I got an opportunity to leave the oil field with some money, and so I decided to take that and build a new business. It's something that I've been wanting to do for many years. And my family works here with me. And so for me, it was just, I was tired of doing what I was doing. I wanted to do something different, and an opportunity presented itself, and I'm glad I took it. Another one big lesson that I learned, so anybody that's in the slaughter business, think about your kill floor and your holding pens. I didn't do a very good job of designing my holding pens. When we get a lot of cattle in there, it's hard to get them in the building sometimes. It takes too much time. And then we use sheet metal on the interior walls of the kill floor. That was a bad choice. I should have put, I don't know, tile or blocks of some kind, something really durable. One of the things that's happened is when the cattle drop and we roll them out to hang them up, they kick the walls, and I've got dents all over one wall back there where they've been kicking. What I wished I would have known, I wished I would have known how hard it was going to be to get help. And I'm not talking about good help, I'm talking about any help. It's hard to find people. We're in a fairly small rural town, and there's a lot of oil field activity where we live. The oil field sucks away all of the help, and so I have a hard time keeping help. The other lesson I learned is how much abuse this building was going to take. I probably would have designed it a bit more sturdy if I'd have known things like doors. You know, the exterior doors have gotten beat up real bad. The walls in the kill floor, just little things like that. The cold doors on my coolers, where people push those knobs and then grab them and pull them back, they've been yanked out of the door. I've had to repair 2 or 3 of those. Again, a good consultant can help you avoid some of that. What would I do differently if I was building today? The design, of course, you know, any design that after 2 or 3 years, you're going to say, well, I wished I'd have done this different or that different. But my kill floor is a bit too big. I would have probably made my kill floor smaller. There's dead space in there that I could have used better somewhere else. I probably should have designed in more packaging space and equipment. I do have a backpack machine, but it's too small. I need a bigger one. And then like everybody else in this business, my cooler's too small, my freezer's too small. Pros and cons of building new. Well, I had a lot of control over the design and the layout, which you might not have renovating an old building. One of the big cons, of course, is the upfront cost. I mean, it's a big investment. Financial considerations such as ROI or debt repayment. Well, there is no ROI, okay? And it's not, so my return is not about money. I did this because it was what I wanted to do. I'm glad I did it. After 3 years, we are now cash flow positive. We're in the green, but there's no return on investment. I could have took that money and put it in a CD making a 1% return and done better with my money, but it wasn't about the money. Another financial consideration that I think everybody should make sure of is that before you do this, you're going to need some capital of your own. You need some money set aside that you can pull from if and when you need it. If you're having to borrow every penny that you do this project with, you might be in trouble pretty fast. Where did I get financing? So I used a combination of conventional loans and a 504 SBA loan. My lender helped put me in touch with a packager of sorts. These guys manage the SBA portion. And then in addition to that, we got some local economic development grants and, of course, my own personal savings. And that's pretty much all I had, Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. I think, is Tracy on now?
Yes, they should be.
All right. Hey, Tracy, using your phone?
Yes. My computer did enjoy the water that was spilt on it.
All right. So now we have Tracy Smutches of Heritage Meats in Washington, and he's going to talk for about 10 minutes about how he converted a school bus barn into a meat processing plant. Take it away, Tracy.
Yeah, hi. Yes, it was a bus barn, but it essentially was a pole barn. And so it was a 40 by 100 building that had 12-foot tall ceilings in it, and which allowed me to build a meat shop inside of the existing construction. I gutted the building and the floors, and I went ahead and dug out the drain lines and designed. I basically built a new shop inside of an existing building. I was very fortunate to find this location because at that time, this was in the early 2000s, in the area where I'm at, there wasn't any water available really in the local town that I started the business in. And I found water, a small water area. And it's, anyways, I found a building that had enough water that I could actually run a plant with it. And the water was $40. It was about $80 a month is what I pay for in water. But it also had a commercial drain field. And the commercial drain field was designed for up to 30 employees and 450 gallons of water a day in usage. Prior to moving to the building, I had taken a water, we were running the business on at a detached 2-car garage where I grew up. So I should have started over again. Let me start over again. This business has been around since 1977. My father started it out of a detached 2-car garage where I grew up. So I'm a second generation butcher. The business was just a hobby business essentially that got out of control and became a full-time business where we were specialized in just custom exempt meat cutting through state inspection. And we had outgrown the facility, and I took over the business after 22 years of ownership from my father, and the business was in a tremendous growth spurt, and we had outgrown the location. We had also the value of the business was, there was no value in the business because of its location. It was next to a home, and you could not, the business was my father and then me. If we left, then the business left. So I looked at this as an opportunity to invest in a solid business that had been around for over 20 years. And by the time I went into the relocating, it had been 26 years of continuous growth, that this was my investment in my retirement. And I would be able to have something at the end of all of my hard work to actually have a business and property that could be sold. So that's what got me to decide I wanted to relocate. I was also relocating closer to my customer base, and it was also, I wanted to add some retail because of the seasonality of the custom meat business at that time. Once I found the business of the building, it kind of fit all the check marks you need in a meat operating facility. It was had zoning, it had a zoning that allowed me to operate. I could add the retail because it was going to be just 10% of my business. It had the water, which I needed, and it had the electrical, which I needed, and it also had the septic system, which was needed. So I looked all around in the area close to where I originally started out, which was about 20 miles from where I'm at now, and I couldn't find anything that I could afford, and I financed this myself. I had was given a real sweet deal from my parents when I took over the business. So the lease was $1,000 a month on the existing business building that was already owned. And then I saved for 6 years, and I had saved up close to $100,000 to $120,000. Plus I had a home, and I had other investments and retirement that I had set up. And so I wrote a business proposal and went to a small commercial bank, and I got the loan. And this was all in 2002, and so I started to build. And at that point in time, it took me about 2 years to build the plant. I did most of the work myself. Most of the equipment I owned, smokehouses, saws, and grinders. My father and I had, took rail out of meat grocery stores through the years, and so we had accumulated a large amount of equipment. So I was really taking and moving a meat shop from one building to another. Took me a good 2 years to do that because I did a lot of the work myself. And by the time I got into the building, it was 2006. At that point in time, we were just going to be a retail custom meat shop, and I had built the shop for that purpose. It was designed to cut custom cutting and some retail, and I designed the flow through the facility in order to do that. And the whole economy nationally, locally, and all changed about 2006, and that was the beginning of the big recession. But fortunately, I built the plant in a way that I could go under USDA inspection, and I became a USDA meat processor during this time. So when we go back into the financing of stuff, financing back then was a lot different than it is now. Lending rules were easier. Money was more available to small businesses. At this point in time, I believe all the panelists would say money's pretty tough to get anymore. When things kind of went south, when the recession started, I got an additional loan from a lending network, which helped me. And so they took a loan against my my equipment to have the working capital that I was I lost essentially because of the loss of revenue from the economy tanking in the industry in this locally. So I've had a lot of challenges, but we came through it swinging pretty well, and now we are growing substantially. I took a business that started at $300,000 a year in revenue, and we're up to about $1.7 to $1.8 million in sales. I went from a custom meat shop that did all 4 species, major species, including all custom exempt and wild game, to now processing under USDA inspection and doing both beef, pork, lamb, and goat, exotic meats, as well as in poultry. And we're also a certified organic meat processing facility. Some of the challenges of building a shop on your own, and especially how I did it, was I took existing equipment and I fitted it into a building, and there were certain doorways I designed and certain things I built that I used because I had them, which ended up hurting me in the long run because certain doors don't really fit very well for how the shop has evolved. Also, the other thing is being on a budget like I was. The doors, like previously said, are always a challenge. And the business is tough. It's a building a commercial business out of Home Depot is tough. You don't have the best of materials at times, so the maintenance on the facility that I built is a constant battle. I'm constantly repairing FRP paneling and replacing walls and doors where people have hit it. If I had the ability to have a 2-foot stem wall into each room, I definitely would have. It would have really saved a lot of corners and edges from pallet jacks and carts running through. It's been a serious challenge, but at that time, there was not a niche meat processing network. And the mentor I had was my father, who built the shop. And we got to where I just started construction, and then he died. So I had the ideas, and we had discussed it. So I went through with it anyways, and that was a big challenge too. Sorry, I've jumped around. I have a serious case of bronchitis, and I just came to work for this meeting because I'm going home. So I'm a little out of sorts. But the meat business is a very personal business. It's a lifestyle in some ways. Return on investment was at the end of my working days, I'd have something to sell or have someone take over, and I would have that would basically was my retirement. I don't know if that's going to happen now because of how things have changed within the industry and things that have happened since my original plans, but it's been a great opportunity. I've learned so much that I have now become quite I actually assist a lot of people with a lot of their projects locally, and some national items too. So it's I have a wealth of information that far exceeds my age from this building this, working through all the challenges with local jurisdictions and building departments and electrical engineers, and so it's been a labor of love, but most people think I'm pretty crazy. So I would not hesitate to do it again. Things that I would have changed would probably been setting it up, the building to allow my smoked meats area to be completely separated from my raw production zone. I have a rail that goes through my cooked meats area it's all well and good in every aspect except federal inspection, and we just cannot operate our business the way it is with that rail system going through the cooked meats area. So I cannot really go under inspection for smoking. So that's really all I have. Again, sorry for the ADD
We
on
have
this.
to switch. It's okay. We have to switch to the next speaker, Tracy, but stay on for the Q&A, please.
All right.
So now we have William Kitsch of Ephrata National Bank, and he's going to just sort of wrap up what we've talked about and talk about from a banker's perspective and a financial perspective, how to think about this decision of building. Take it away. Unmute yourself, Bill.
So, let's see. So, Bill, you are, yeah, looks like you're unmuted, but you're not coming through for whatever reason. You may want to unplug and just let's see how your computer. There you go. We can we can hear you now if you just want to use your computer's microphone.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I apologize. As I mentioned to the panelists, I snapped my headset. I guess they finally decided to kick out before I got on the call. Thanks, Rebecca. I apologize for that. I feel like there's just a tremendous amount of wealth of knowledge that was shared. Many of the topics that I was going to cover. And so what I'll do is I'll just real quick glance over how I look at projects like this, especially from the perspective of a banker, and then maybe, you know, we can move to question and answer, because I think that's probably where the value is today. But and a lot of times when I get on calls like this, I have to apologize because I'm not a producer, I'm not a business owner. I do not profess to be an entrepreneur. I try to take an entrepreneurial spirit to what I do, but I am a banker. So for that, I apologize. When a banker looks at a project like this, there's a standard. It doesn't matter if you're in the food production area, you're farming, or you're stamping widgets in a manufacturing facility. We look at 5 things, which is character, which is essentially whether or not you have a business plan that was mentioned. You know, do you have a feasibility study? Is it in writing? Do you know why you're doing what you're doing? All those things that were already mentioned is very important to the bank. In a lot of cases, a criticism of bankers is that, you know, we don't care about the soft stuff, but if it's not provided in writing, I will tell you that most bankers won't step back to ask for it. But when you do provide it in writing, it does give us a tremendous asset to move forward with from a kind of the narrative or soft side of an opportunity. The second thing is coverage, and coverage is just a fancy way of saying cash flow. Can you pay your payments? Can you pay your employees? Can you pay your accounts payables and keep ahead of your working capital? We're always going to project that into the future, but we're also going to do that from a historical perspective, and I'll get into that a little bit. The next is, after coverage, we're really looking at capacity, which is the mix between equity and leverage. So the mix between what you borrow from a bank or a financing institution and what your equity. A lot of times I always try to remind my entrepreneurs or my business owners that every business is 100% financed. It's just by who. And we heard a little bit, you know, Matt shared that he spent some of his own capital on the operation. That puts you in a different class of financing than, say, someone that doesn't have that cash going in. Both are fine, but it's a consideration. The next C, and these are the 5 C's. The next C is what we call collateral. Collateral is just safety to the bank. There's no other way to put it. And every asset class has their own kind of degree of safety. So you can have real estate, which is going to be your lowest risk, so to speak, and you can have machinery equipment, which is going to kind of be that mid-range. And then you can go all the way out to perishable assets, which would be your inventory. And accounts receivable would be also collateral, which has its own set of risk. The next is conditions, which when you get into conditions, you're really looking at controls that the bank is wishing to put on the use of their money. And so we have conditions or things like amortization. Conditions are, if you're in a construction process, you know, advancements. It could be financial reporting. So, you know, I give you a condition that you have to that you have to have a debt coverage ratio of 1.20 or to 1 every year. You give me financial reporting that proves that. It's a condition of the use of the money. They can be stringent or they can be lenient, and different lenders have different perspectives on that. Generally, in a higher conditioned loan, you may have a lower interest rate. And so conventional lenders, which I am, tend to put loans out there with higher conditions, where SBA, USDA, and I apologize, my computer seems to want to send off all kinds of notifications here if you can hear that. USDA or CDFIs would generally have lower conditions, but their rate of interest might be higher. So that's the perspective that I come at this from. The decision to build or retrofit is really a business decision, and there's pros and cons when looking at it from a financing perspective. I'll just cover real quick, build to suit, as I would call it, building from scratch, taking either an existing building and building it to your likeness, or just building from the ground up, the dirt up. Generally speaking, it's going to give you the most lenient loan terms. And the reason for that is it's generally going to be real estate secured. And so, again, safety of collateral is going to allow me to be more lenient. That being said, it's also going to require probably a higher percentage of your own capital into that project. So there's a trade-off there. But by getting the more lenient loan terms, you're really reducing your cash flow restrictions. So in some cases, it can give you some advantages. You can build it to suit, which means that you can build it with expansion in mind. We heard that, great advice, Matt, on stubbing out, water lines and sewer lines outside the building for future expansion. Not a meat processing example, but one that we see here in Pennsylvania a lot. I am in agricultural lending, and so I work with the food system from the farm to basically to the retailers is our definition of financing. And so we have a lot of poultry production in this area. We'll have a lot of poultry farmers who build 2 chicken houses, and they do the excavation for the third. To do the excavation on 2 chicken houses from the ground up is about $150,000. To do the excavation on the third is about $170,000. So it's only a $20,000 swing, but you end up, if you have to bring them back, it's going to be about $100,000 for that third in the future. So that's an example of planning for the future. We don't have the business opportunity today, but we relatively believe it's going to come. Those sort of things is just better utilizing your soft costs of a build. There's more opportunity, and soft costs are not as restrictive in a build up from the ground as they would in a retrofit. So the other thing I like to point out, because I have a local meat processor, it's really a case study for failure, and it's unfortunate. We had an existing business. They built out a new plant, and they failed to take into consideration utilities, labor. Utilities such as water is important, so they had a water restriction. They were on a well, but they did have access to sewage. They just couldn't get enough water out of the well. That plant failed because they couldn't run their processing line fast enough and hard enough and long enough every day. They were restricted by utilities. And so generally when we're building, you can plan those things. Your location selection is really in your hands as the business owner. Contrary to a retrofit, generally, building a plant is going to be more aggregate dollars. It's going to require more capital from the owner to the table, but it's going to give you the most lenient terms. A retrofit goes the other direction, which is in some cases, a retrofit may be fewer dollars into the project. So it has a lower capital need to get the business started, to get it off the ground. And I'll throw purchasing a business, because Jessica, it sounded like that's what you did, into that retrofit piece, because I haven't seen a business yet that is truly turnkey. We all plan for it, and I can give you disaster after disaster where it just did not work. But what happens is you go in there and you find that it wasn't quite as rosy as you thought, and you end up having to change SOPs, which means you end up changing physical assets, and it just rolls downhill. So it ends up being a retrofit type. But a retrofit should theoretically give you more square foot for a lower price per square foot. There is depreciation of utilization in a project, and retrofit, you're trying to really offset the capital need with elbow grease. Think of it that way. So if you're buying a house, you know, fixer-upper versus brand new construction, the fixer-upper is going to give you more square foot for the dollar. And that's what we're looking for with a retrofit. What happens? Well, typically we're financing things like equipment. It doesn't always come with real estate, or the real estate already has something hung on it, so you end up not being able to gain any advantage there. So we're financing equipment that is doable. We use something we call a UCC. In Pennsylvania, we file it at the state. We basically secure that equipment, but again, your loan terms are going to be significantly shorter, which means it's going to have a larger strain on cash flow going forward. We see business owners compromise when they do retrofits, and they're compromising basically just to get started. They compromise things like size of equipment. They compromise workflow and ideals, which end up over time taking the top off of revenue, right? So what do I mean by that? Top line revenue is your gross revenue. It doesn't really speak to net. So what happens is a business owner says, well, if I look at this one piece of equipment, I may be giving up some sales, but I'm not giving up that much net income because it doesn't flow through to my net income. So you say, well, that's not as profitable as these other items. The issue becomes that when you take your top off of revenue, the business shrinks and gets smaller, and you have a more constrained cash flow, believe it or not. So sometimes revenue at a lower profit margin comes in a season where your high profit business is not. And so it carries you through your seasonal business. So we generally like to say, do everything you can to maximize your top line revenue. That should be in the first 3 years of a business. After those first 3 years of a business, generally 3 to 7, we're looking at maximizing efficiencies. That's where we're going to look at labor or utility utilization, energy utilization, those types of things. And then after a business is up and running for 7 years, we're really going to start selecting product lines based on profitability. That holds true in most businesses, including the processing business. Retrofits, every time, no matter how well you plan and how well you do a feasibility study, they just are not very predictable. I'd love to say they are, but they're not, because there's a lot of unforeseen problems, and those unforeseen problems could be regulatorily, they could be from the customer's perspective of quality. Frankly, they can be from the business owner's perspective, meaning you have an idea of quality, you have an idea of product. I've not seen an entrepreneur buy a business that didn't have what we consider to be a transformational idea. They buy a business and say, well, that owner ran the business a certain way, but if I run it my way, I can get more net income or net return on investment to the bottom line. And what happens is it requires capital. It requires change. And those changes generally can become a serious bottleneck in the process. So I guess at the end of the day, what I would focus on in your project is trying to answer those 5 C's before you get to a banker. And I know different bankers have different styles. We here at Ephrata National Bank try to be very consultative. And so we're willing to have that conversation, but really focus in on the character, and on your part, you can do your homework and do your plan. Look at your coverage. Really plan out your working capital and your cash flow. We like to see a 13-month forward-looking rolling cash flow. It's just something that we like to see. It really helps us do our job. So, and if you're constructing or retrofitting, by all means, look at your cash flow through the project. So don't just look at the cash flow that the day I start the plant, this is what my cash flow looks like. Tell us where your cash flow is going to come through to either pay the interest on the loan, or when do you have to make the draws, what your contractor's expected payment terms, all those sort of things through that construction period, and then look 13 months out from finish. So really, in a lot of construction periods, we're talking about a 2-year forward-looking cash flow. But if you can do that, it makes a really good business decision, and it makes a great loan decision. Consider your collateral. So even though you may be asking for more dollars to do a build up from the ground up, if you're gaining real estate, you may have better terms than you can get if you're just doing equipment on a retrofit. So don't be intimidated or worried about asking for more dollars. That's part of the conversation to see if a project makes more sense. don't allow that cap of dollars to really affect your business decision. We like our clients to ask for as much as they think they need to make a business work, and then let's make a decision from there versus trying to give us a loan application they think we're going to approve. Because again, we become the constraint on your business at that point instead of all those other issues I've already pointed out. Lastly, consider conditions, and this is really relational. The more conditions you're willing to offer, so the better your financial reporting is, the more flexible that your bank will be. I forget which speaker said, we have more debt now because the banker likes us. Conditions really is a practical way of building relationship. So use that as a tool to give to your financiers, but also keep it realistic. Don't let them bully you, because we shouldn't do that. It's a conversation, but just understand that, it's a way that you can kind of sweeten the deal a little bit for a banker that may not come with a financial offset, right? It doesn't cost you any money to keep better records. You just have to stay diligent on it. And I get it. I understand, sometimes financial office time isn't the fun part of your business. Most entrepreneurs like to spend their time with production or sales, and I get that. It happens in my business as well. So I would just encourage you to build relationships, consider those items, and if I can answer any specific questions, Rebecca, I'll be glad to, but I hope that's what we're looking for today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bill. We could probably spend an hour talking just with you to learn more about this, but I do need to spend a little time on some questions. Zena Murray, if all the speakers can unmute themselves. Zena Murray was curious what caused Jessica's fire.
It was in the smokehouse. So the original 1978 facility purchased, and the smokehouse had a small fire, and that blew up from there. Within 5 minutes, the facility was a total loss.
Yeah, it seems like smokehouses are a cause of most meat plant fires, unfortunately.
So now we have fire compression and better training in-house. So.
Good. Zena also asked for your new facility when you rebuilt, that was about 540,000. What's the square footage of that?
So rebuilding on the existing footprint was about 8,000 square feet. So that's about $63 a square foot above ground. But please keep in mind that the wastewater, you heard all speakers talk about utilities and wastewater, right? So that is a huge expense. So we calculated that there was that much underground still existing. So $63 a square foot underground. Currently we have 12,000 square feet. So we've added on over the years as well. And obviously spent more money.
Yeah. And did you have to expand your wastewater system to accommodate that?
Have not had to expand the wastewater system to accommodate that, but like the speakers suggested, last year purchased additional land. We were landlocked on 1.3 acres with a concern of future expansion, including wastewater management. So purchased an additional 6 acres surrounding the facilities. And the first thing that every planner says is make sure you know where your new mound system or however your new septic system is going before you build anything more.
Let's see, trying to get through a few more. Let's see, Zena also asked any resources for plants looking to become federally inspected. I would say, the NPAN website has a wealth of information. Also, as Matt Campbell was talking about, working with a really good consultant. Hey, Matt, would you be willing to write in the chat box the name of the consultant that you worked with that helped design your plant?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, but I think he has retired. I don't believe he's taken on any new plants. But his name is Daryl Hudson. I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, try on the NPAN website. We have a list of architects, builders, and consultants, and I'm always trying to add more names to that. So if you're of good folks that will help design facilities, please let me know about that. Nick McCann asked, typically, what are ideal facilities for retrofits? We are looking to open warehouses and retail spaces like a Kmart or an a big box store that might be empty. Would something like that be okay for a retrofit? So, and he's talking more for in his particular case, it's more for fabrication, not for slaughter. Bill, any thoughts on that? Should we take these big box stores and turn them into fabrication plants?
Yeah, from a financial perspective, it can actually be very attractive. Partly because of the terms and conditions under those, and one of the things that I had on my list, but due to time I scratched it, was talking about lease buybacks as a way of financing. So you could, if you were to take a large box store of Kmart, in banking we call that commercial real estate. It's CRE. It's generally leased property. So the building and the land underlying is leased, and so you're paying a rent payment on it. That retrofit, then all the equipment and build out on the inside is your responsibility. In a lot of cases, when you can take a building, and I'm sure the writer there, Nicholas was talking about Kmart being in our area, they're closing up, right? So it's space that may not be well utilized as a box store again. You can get a very attractive lease on something like that. And so I do like the idea of finding a good location with ample space with a below market lease. That can be a real nice way to finance your project.
Wouldn't though, like a big box store, not necessarily be set up with the right type of utilities, whereas maybe a defunct food processing plant would have the right kind of utilities for wastewater and energy and all of that?
Yeah, we're a little bit I would say we're in a suburban area here in Pennsylvania, so we don't typically have issues with utilities. We have oversized utilities to most of our projects because of the Pennsylvania Building Code. So we don't run into that a whole lot, but you're absolutely right. The challenge with an existing slaughter or processing facility is it was generally, if that was built from the ground up, it was with a product in mind. So if you're going to change the product, sometimes that doesn't fit. In Reading, Pennsylvania, we had a project that was a food manufacturing plant. They were processing tomatoes and things, and it was thought that the utility was the benefit. The problem is when they took the conveyors and the equipment out, the new equipment did not fit in, just the interior floor plan, concrete, so to speak, didn't allow it to fit very well. So they scratched that and went to more like the bus garage. I love that idea.
Mm-hmm. Zena brought up the fact that some old commercial real estate buildings may have asbestos issues or other environmental issues, perhaps lead in the pipes or other things that may not even make it food safe. So she suggests taking that into consideration before you think about retrofitting an old building.
Most of the time you're going to be
Bill,
you were to have an environmental study.
Yeah.
An environmental study.
The bank typically will require it as well, what we call a phase one. But I'd also encourage you to have any inspectors out on site as part of your consultative process. And I would imagine that most of your consultants would facilitate that. But if you're not using a consultant, certainly call your state inspectors and your federal inspectors and say, hey, would you mind walking the site? We generally get a great response.
Yeah. And Bill, when we talked on the phone, you were telling me about some folks that purchased an existing facility to renovate, and then once they started the renovation process, it was like this giant can of worms that got opened, and it turned out they probably spent more money on the renovations than they would have if they built from scratch.
It's
more about that.
Yeah, it's an on-farm processing plant that's been there for 25 years. They started as turkey farmers. They process about 20,000 birds a year and direct market to the consumer. So it's only their product. They're inspected by the state. It is not a federal facility. So they're capped at that 20,000 number due to Pennsylvania law. But nevertheless, they had this idea, this old plant, which was built on 2 stories. So they had a lower level. In Pennsylvania, we call it a bank barn. I apologize if you don't know what that is, but it's basically a barn that's built. Well, one side is a bank. It looks like a 1-story building, and the other side has a basement, similar to a walk-in basement. They were built on 2 sides. They killed it, or 2 floors. They killed in the lower, and then processed on the top. And they had a rail that went up and carried the birds. Their idea was lift the top off this, build a shell on top, and put new equipment in, but leave the bottom kill floor right where it was at. When they lifted that top, they just found that nothing was going to meet inspection. Once they opened the walls, tore the floor off, it just kept getting deeper and deeper. And so originally it was supposed to be a $300,000 retrofit. It turned out that they spent about $1 million. They could have probably built that plant down the road for $600,000 to $750,000, but by the end of the day, they ran new water line into the farm. They had to run 3-phase electric. They ended up having to build a much more sturdy building because they'd already invested a certain amount of money to lift the building off. So by moving the building to a flat spot at that point was sunk cost. So they decided to keep the site they had for retail purposes and tradition, and it just ended up costing more money. But they're up and running. They're profitable. They had very limited debt going in because the business had run for 25 years, but they took on more debt than they expected.
I will also say a couple facilities here in the Northwest, when they tried to go from custom to USDA and had to make some improvements to their facility, when they went to go pull permits from their county to make those improvements, and this was in 2 particular cases, it was found out that their wastewater systems were essentially unapproved, had been grandfathered in. They were not even leach field systems. They were what do you call them? Just holes in the ground, I guess. And in both of these cases, they were unable to expand their facilities or become USDA because they didn't have approved wastewater systems, and they were too landlocked to purchase additional land to build a proper leach field system. So that's definitely another consideration. One in just renovating a facility, open with your county when you start to pull permits. And then also going from custom to USDA is also going to require usually going to require some improvements that you just may not be able to make on that property. So got to take that into consideration. So I think we need to end because we're a little bit over time. Kathy Webster asked if she could get contact information for Tracy and is open to providing a tour of his facility. Tracy, will you pop that in the chat box for everyone?
I sure will.
And I know that he's willing to give a tour because I've gotten one before. Right?
Yep. Sure, certainly.
All right. Is there any last question? Any parting words from our attendees?
Hey, Rebecca, if I could just put a plug in there for any entrepreneurs out there looking to start a USDA slaughter plant. Pennsylvania is open for business because we have a deficit of processing facilities, but we have an abundance of animals. We're in desperate need of facilities.
It's funny, Pennsylvania has more inspected facilities than any other state in the United States. And us out here in Oregon are very jealous that you can literally drive like a half an hour and find a plant anywhere in your state.
It is. If you consider we have 50,000 steer in just my county. And we have a consumer base willing to buy anything. We just can't. And most of it gets processed at very large processors, and it's we have opportunity. So
Yes, you do have a lot of animals and a lot of eaters out there.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for all of your time. And if anyone has any further questions, please follow up with me. And as well, this webinar will be on YouTube by next week. So if you have friends or colleagues who wanted to see it, it will be available. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.